Well, hello, this is episode 146, hard to believe. And today we're moving into a really interesting, I think, and important parable that Jesus tells. And it's riding on the back of what we've just been looking at, the whole issue of prosperity and wealth and where people fit in the pecking order. And the way in which the kingdom of heaven is, and the kingdom perspective on this, and how it is and will be set up. So I hope you find it as exciting as I have as I've been considering it. We're picking up the text in Matthew 20, verses 1 through to 16. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire labourers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the labourers for the usual daily wage, other translation says a denarius, which was the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. When he went out about 9 o'clock, he saw others idle in the marketplace. And he said to them, "You also go into the vineyard, and I'll pay you whatever is right." So they went. When he went out again about noon and about 3 o'clock, he did the same thing. About 5 o'clock he went out and found others standing around, and he said to them, "Why are you standing here idle all day?" They said to him, "Because no one has hired us." He said to him, "You also go into the vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, "Call the labourers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and then going to the first." When those hired about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage, a denarius. Now, when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them received also the usual daily wage, the one denarius. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you've made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." But he replied to one of them, "Friend, I'm doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage, for the one denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last the same as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last." So I just want us again to reiterate that this is a continuation from where we've just been. And he starts off because the kingdom of heaven is like. He's just as if he's launching in. Jesus is just launching in to this parable to give more clarity about what he's just been talking about. So we're starting now in chapter 20. Yet the theme of chapter 19 continues. After Jesus finished speaking about the lack of advantage, nay, the obstacles that wealth provided to kingdom entrance, he finished with the words, "Many who are first will be last, and the last will be first." He's been talking here about those who are at the top of the economic pile. I like the way that Eugene Peterson puts it in the Message. This is the great reversal. Many of the first ending up last, and the last first. And so we come to this parable, the workers in the vineyard. And we notice that he's now been talking here about people at the bottom of the economic pile. Before, as he's looking at the rich young ruler and all the benefits and privileges that the wealthy enjoy, particularly the sense that they are the ones who are approved of and blessed by God and therefore must be holy. We're now talking about the people at the other end and the bottom of the pile. And he reverses the order. Whereas before, at the end of talking about the rich people, he was saying the first will be last. Now he says, so the last will be first, and the first will be last. I was listening to Andy Stanley a few days back. He suggests that in the kingdom, there is no first and last. I was really struck by this. That what Jesus is, and that's what Jesus is saying here, that no one has a prior claim on Jesus. that we're all on the same footing. We all come on the same basis. And it's clear here that material success this side of eternity gives no advantage on the other side, and that poverty this side presents no liability or disadvantage on the other side. That just because you're rich doesn't mean that in eternity, in that eschatological kingdom, that you have an advantage, because you don't. In fact, it can be a liability to you, as we talked about in our last episode. Or that because you're poor doesn't mean that you don't have a place of belonging in that kingdom. That you're at a disadvantage in that kingdom, because you're not. I wonder what this did to the poor people who heard Jesus, so used all their lives to seeing themselves as the spiritual also-rans, as the ones that God hadn't blessed, as the ones who weren't even sure that there was a place for them in God's eternal kingdom. Because clearly they were poor, clearly that was because it was their own fault, because that's what they are constantly being told, and there was no place for them. And maybe they're starting to recognize that they have been had, that they've been sold a pup, that they've been conned by the rich, by the wealthy, by the successful, into believing a lie about themselves, a lie about God, and a lie about others, the wealthy, that they were prosperous and successful because they were particularly favoured by God. And this is not the case. Lack of material resources, Jesus is saying, does not disqualify them from God's grace or label them as losers in God's heart. It was others who did this to them, the wealthy. And they believed it and repeated the same message for themselves. The narrative was constantly cast at them, that you're in this situation because God hasn't blessed you. And God hasn't blessed you because you're defective in some way. There is no place for you to rise above where you are. And they believed it. And they thought, well, I guess this is the way it is, because everybody believed it. That was how they saw life. That was the lens they saw through. Yet James, in his little epistle towards the end of the New Testament, gets this clear-sighted understanding from Jesus. And he puts it like this in James chapter 2. My brothers and sisters, do you with your acts of favoritism really believe in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ? For if a person with gold rings and in fine clothes comes into your assembly, and if a poor person in dirty clothes also comes in, and if you take notice of the one wearing the fine clothes and say, here's a seat here, have a seat here, please, while to the one who is poor you say, stand there or sit at my feet, have you not made distinctions among yourselves and became judges with evil thoughts? Isn't he right? You're actually buying into that whole thing, that these are the worthy ones, these are the holy ones, these are the ones that God has favoured. Give them the good seats. These grubby, smelly, dirty, poor people are the ones who clearly that God has cast off. And James is saying, haven't you become judges with evil thoughts? Listen, my beloved brothers and sisters. Has not God chosen the poor in the world to be rich in faith and to be heirs of the kingdom that he has promised to those who love him? But you have dishonoured the poor. Is it not the rich who oppress you? Is it not they who drag you into the court? Is it not they who blaspheme the excellent name that was invoked over you? Wow. He's saying, you've got to watch out. These rich people, they're the ones who are ripping you off. And they're conning you into believing lies about God and about yourself, and ultimately about them as well. In today's America, even in the evangelical church, the Christian church, James would almost certainly have been labelled a socialist, or maybe worse, a Marxist. As would Jesus, if people were willing to hear what he's saying in these two chapters that we've been considering here in Matthew's Gospel. As I said, we've been sold a pup. We've been conned. In this parable that we've been considering, Jesus is referencing the poor. They clearly don't have steady jobs. They don't. They lack resources to change their situation. All they have to offer is their bodies to do manual labour and hopefully receive the same standard daily rate, a denarius. There was no way that they were ever going to get rich on this. It merely kept starvation away for another day, for them and their families. And so they turn up to the labour exchange, hoping for work. And in the kingdom, all get what they need. All go away able to feed their families another day. All are treated the same, according to their need. Imagine how upsetting this was in the day. For the rich, this was seditious. Jesus threatens the very basis of the control they have over society. Imagine the rage of the other rich. People will stop working altogether and just laze around if they get some kind of benefit, pay them too much. Nobody will want to work in our fields and look after our stock, pick our fruit. We'll either have to pay people more or go and do the work ourselves. I can imagine the rich people who were also landowners would not have been happy with the landowner in this parable that Jesus tells. They would have been very upset. Jesus calls into question their entitlement to call the shots for everyone else on the basis of their supposed God-given prosperity, that God has anointed them to rule, and that the poor are worth little in God's sight. So that's the one group. They're not happy. And what about the poor who've worked all day? Part of the issue I don't think that they're seeing is that at least they knew when they started, even though they're born the heat of the day, that at the end of the day they're going to get paid and are going to be able to pay and are going to be able to buy food for their families. Whereas those who have been all day not had work come to the 11th hour are getting increasingly fretful. Although they haven't been physically labouring, their day has becoming increasingly anxious, knowing that if they don't get any pay at all, their families are going to go to bed hungry that night. Who's worse off? I think it's a hard call. So the poor who have worked all day cannot be pleased or relieved for those who will also go home able to feed their families, even though they've only been at work such a short time. This continues to show us the fallenness of the way we see. Jesus' morality works at a different level. All we're looking at is who's worked long, who's worked short. And so that those who have worked all day and the rich who have seen what this landowner does would both scream, "It's not fair." There's really good news in all of this. It gives us a clearer picture, a much clearer picture of what the kingdom of God really looks like. And it's not an individualistic dog eat dog society where they supposedly trumpet the value of freedom. It's not that kind of society. But it's one where we each seek the health, the well-being, and the prosperity of one another. Each seek to doing the best so that others can more than just survive. And we discover that we're all equally loved by God. There are no losers in this kingdom. There are no also-rans in this kingdom. There are ultimately no lasts. We are all firsts together. God bless you.